When Biden was elected, of course, there were opinions on both sides. And we said, you know what? We're going to pray for this new administration. And we did the exact same thing. And so, we do our part. We vote and we can have opinions, but we will not allow, and we're going to try our hardest to not allow the divisiveness of the political landscape to enter our church.
Marcus Aurelius said, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." What is your life echoing through eternity? Welcome to Echoes Through Eternity with Dr. Jeffrey Skinner. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and encourage leaders from across the globe to plant missional churches and be servant leaders. So join us and hear the stories of servant leaders reverberating lives as God echoes them through eternity. Brought to you by Missional Church Planting and Leadership Development and Dynamic Church Planting International.
Welcome into Echoes Through Eternity. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey D. Skinner. What is God echoing through your life today? I am joined in the studio today by Dr. John Hannah. He is a pastor in the Oregon area as well as a professor at Nazarene Bible College. I believe it's where he's does some teaching, adjunct teaching there, as well as he does many other things. He's a husband, he's a father, and all that type of stuff, everything that goes with that. But his primary role is that he pastors a congregation there in Oregon, but brings a tremendous insight, has been in ministry for, how long have you been in ministry, John?
Let's see, coming up on 25 years now.
Yeah, 25 years. You have seen a lot in your time of pastoring, a lot of changes, I'm sure.
Yes.
So anyway, we're joined by John, and welcome into the studio, brothers. Good to have you here today.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about, you've been preaching for 25 years. What do you teach at? Is it Nazarene Bible College you're teaching at sometimes?
Yes, Nazarene Bible College. I've been teaching there for about coming up on 12 years now. Variety of courses. I just started a biblical interpretation class this week.
Well, that's fun.
And Intro to Old Testament, Intro to New Testament, spiritual formation, theology. I enjoy it. We have some really fantastic students, and it's a good experience.
Yeah, and I have been surprised at the diversity of culture, thought-wise. People that come at Nazarene Bible College there, it's primarily online. I guess it's only online now. For a long time, Correct. They had a campus in Colorado. I'm always surprised. We think of Nazarene Bible College as primarily being Nazarenes, but the reality is it's not necessarily just Nazarenes that you're teaching there, right?
That is true. The diversity of students is really expansive. And I think that just speaks volumes to the type of students that are engaged in their education. And it's really exciting to see.
Yeah. So probably what would be the thing that you enjoy most about teaching at a Bible college context there?
The students are just eager to learn and grow, and it is exciting just to be with them on their journey and to hear their perspectives, the interchange of dialogue. It's a spiritual, mental delight to walk through this educational process with these students.
Yeah. Now, do you find, as far as biblical literacy, I know culture itself tends to be less literate biblically, but do you find that people that are coming to you, or you talked about spiritual formation, what is that looking like there? Do you find you're having to do a lot of heavy lifting and kind of teaching them the basics of the Bible, or they come pretty much already biblically literate and you're just trying to shape that?
Well, it's a combination of both. I think the students that we are interacting with at the Bible College have a pretty good foundation. Most of them come from, really good churches where a solid foundation has been laid. But you are correct in that, biblical illiteracy across the board is at an all-time low. Ironically, even though, the scriptures are more easily accessible to us than ever before, But we do have work to do at every level, beginning at the local church on up, on teaching and helping with biblical literacy.
Yeah. I do a lot of, as you know, do a lot of coaching and training for church planting.
Hmm.
And I have them from all over the world. Literally, I'll have them from India to Nova Scotia, Canada to Australia and the Philippines. I mean, just literally all over the world. And I'm always impressed, truthfully, at the work ethic that these
Yes.
people are coming with. And their, comparatively, their biblical literacy, across the world is much higher generally than what it is here in the United States. And I don't know what that is. I do know they have a much better appreciation of scripture, than what we do. And they challenge me on a regular basis with their work ethic, but also their biblical knowledge, because I think sometimes from an American point of view, and I don't mean this from a political point of view or anything, but we can almost come across as I hate this word, but elite from time to time. Like we know more than we're the hope of the world. Somehow we're going to reach down and lift you up. And I'm telling you, they put me to shame sometimes. And so the people that I'm talking with, and they, at the end of the course, they have to complete what we call a vision, plan, and a timeline. And the detailed scope of those timelines and those visions are, I mean, they're just, I'm just amazed. I've been in church planting for 15 years, and I have planted 4 churches total.
Wow.
And these people will come out wanting to plant 100 churches. They'll come out wanting to do an entire movement of 1,000 churches. And these are not just pie in the sky visions. I mean, they have plans attached to them. So they say, this is what I'm going to do. And I mean, it's a detailed process that they lay out for how they're going to plant. And so it's, I'll follow back up with them in 4 months, and they will have planted already 10 churches. And I'm like, what? How are you planting 10 churches, And,
Amen.
and so just, it really does. I mean, I can understand in a seminary context or Bible college context, how that would kind of help keep you fresh, even as a pastor.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the aspects I really love, hearing the perspectives of the different students. Yes.
And then I would imagine, too, it kind of helps you to navigate. It's probably helped you in your pastoral context there to kind of help keep you relevant and plugged into culture, because so often pastoring can kind of isolate us. We can kind of be in a bubble with our congregation, with our church, to think, well, and then make the assumption, we'll extrapolate from that this is what the rest of the world is like. And often that is not true.
Correct.
So what would you find most rewarding about pastoring in your local How long have you been at that church there first?
I've been here at this church for 20 and a half years.
Wow. How about that? Man, that is so unusual. So you have really, they've really witnessed you mature as a pastor with them being there that long.
Well, and I've seen the church just grow as well, too, and mature. And I mean, when you've been at a pastorate as long as I have, you have the joy of seeing, kids, little kids that you knew just grow up and become mature. So it's a mutual growth. It's exciting.
Yeah, you're a district superintendent's dream come true.
Well, I don't know about that, but
you stayed in the same place. I mean, it really is. I mean, statistics tell you that the longer you stay in one pastorate, I mean, really it's after 7 or 8 years is before you ever really begin to get any credibility with the congregation there. So 20 years, you can do and lead a lot more change than what your typical pastor can, because you've got such deep trust with your people.
That is the absolute truth. Yes. Our people know me. I know them. There is trust. We know our strengths. We know our weaknesses. And so, and that can only happen over time. So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so I want to talk to you a little bit about one of the things that we see, or I see a lot in pastoral ministry. Even for whether a pastor's been somewhere for 10, 15, 20 years like yourself, or whether they've just been there for, 5 or 6 years, pastoring can be difficult. It can be emotionally difficult. It's difficult on the family, because you tend to have your children and everything they do is magnified because everybody's watching them, and they think that people just have a tendency to place the pastor on a pedestal. I don't know if they do that quite as much culturally now as what they used to. We've had so many public failures of pastors, in the last, especially with, the advent of television and 24-hour news, all that stuff gets magnified. Of course, you had Mars Hill that just crashed and burned and the pastor over there. And so many public failures. And in the Catholic Church, we've had so many scandals there. And of course, evangelical churches are not exempt from those either. So I don't know if we place them as high on a pedestal, but I think subconsciously we still do. We tend to think of that pastor as being the one in the family, his family having everything together. That son never, always gets straight A's in school, he never gets in fights on the playground. Those are the type of things I think are stereotypical understandings, and that has an emotional toll, I think, on the pastor. And so the need for balance in their life, the need for time to withdraw are important. And so you were talking about you're coming up on sabbatical. Explain what a sabbatical is, how it's different from Sabbath, which we have every week. Talk about that a little bit for us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I am fortunate, being at this church as long as I have. I'll be coming up and taking my third 13-week sabbatical. And so my first sabbatical was in 2009, and that was a solid 13 weeks. And then my second sabbatical was in 2016, and that was another 13 weeks. And so in a few weeks, I will be taking another sabbatical. This sabbatical will probably be a little bit different, and we're still working out the details. But yes, as you mentioned, the need for Sabbath is biblical. It's absolutely necessary. And the need for sabbatical is critical as well. A sabbatical is different from a vacation. I think a vacation, which we all need, is, for lack of a better word, a vacation is more mindless. You're sitting on a beach somewhere and you're not thinking about anything, and it's just complete downtime. Ideally, that's what it should be. But a sabbatical, and even a Sabbath, is the opposite of mindless. I like to think of it as mindful. You are intentional in approaching this day of rest. You are intentional in using this day of rest for worship and prayer and the spiritual disciplines that come with that. And the same is true with sabbatical. It's not mindless, it's mindful. I am going to be intentional for self-care and reflection, reorientation, repurposing, continuing education. And so it's critical. And as a pastor, we need to help our people develop that rhythm of Sabbath, sabbatical, rest, and on and on.
You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices, share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles and ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly. So the sabbatical, and you say is mindful. What are some activities that you might do on a sabbatical that helps to renew you? I've known pastors that would actually begin to write books or write an entire book on a sabbatical. What are some activities you think are helpful or most helpful to you on sabbatical?
I think intentional travel intention in meeting, certain people that maybe you want to meet. I know in my first sabbatical, I was able to meet Rick Warren, and he was very encouraging. He told me the very first sermon he ever preached was in a Nazarene church. And so, there may be certain people you want to meet, certain books you want to read, a book you want to write, specific places of travel, I think are important. And so it really is up to the individual, pastor. And there needs to be some degree of flexibility, of course, but you do need kind of an outline on how to approach your sabbatical. And so, yeah, it's a mindful time where I'm going to focus on myself, on God, and on those areas that I need to reorient in my own life and ministry.
Good. So what are some areas that you have seen in your 20 years of pastoring? Where can you think of a story? I know you probably got, literally, you probably just throw a dart in his story, but is there a particular story that comes to mind of just transformation that you always kind of go back to that just reminds you of your call and what you're doing and how, to kind of borrow the title from the podcast here, how God has used you and your voice to echo it through eternity there?
Wow. When I get a phone call from someone who says, God has really been speaking to me about this, and maybe they've been hesitant or they've neglected that call, or they've neglected, what God has told them to do. Just last week, I got a call from a young lady who said, God's been really talking to me about, I want to step up and help with the teens in our church, but I don't feel prepared. I'm qualified. And I said to her, I've sensed that. I was just waiting for you to respond to God's voice. And so it's those moments. They're not big. They don't always have to be big, grand things, but it's the rhythm of living with your congregation and seeing God work and move in their hearts and in their lives, and then responding to that call. That is what excites me the most. And so we're seeing things like that happen, and it's exciting. It thrills me.
Yeah. And that's cool that you mentioned it's the small things like that continue to keep you going. A lot of times we think of these, magnificent stories of this kid who grew up kind of a Paul Harvey type story, right, where, it started out this way and today he is, or she has grown up and she's, pastoring a church of 10,000 in Cambodia, right, or something. Right. But you chose one where someone who's being obedient to God. And absolutely, that really is why we do what we do on a Sunday after Sunday basis. And sometimes, put up with some of the more unpleasant things, the less sexy things of ministry, which are, just the conflict that we have. I can recall when I was first starting out in ministry, I was a minister of music sitting in the pastor's study. We would gather before the service and we would just kind of debrief and then pray. And so we were meeting and this lady knocks on the door to the pastor's study, and she's an older lady, and she opens the door and talking to the pastor. She's, "Pastor, if you don't come in here and talk to so-and-so, you're going to find her laying on the floor dead."
Oh, no. Oh.
Because me, brand new in ministry, and I'm thinking, holy cow, you need to go attend to that. He had been in ministry for 35 or 40 years. He said, okay. So she closed the door, and I said, do you need to go? No, he said, they're fine. Their family, nothing I can do to fix that. And, and so he just went on and we went out. Everything was fine. And, he was right. They were family. They got into an argument over something small, but because of, I think sometimes the people we feel safest with are the ones that we're the most nasty with. And so anyway, they had gotten into it over some minor something, but by the time we were done, they had pretty much resolved the issue and kind of moved on. And he taught me there, that not everything is an emergency, even if somebody else thinks it is. Sometimes they just need time and space to work it out on their own. Right. And I see a lot of it seems like we live in such a hyperbolic culture today with, we just saw an election very close in a lot of different places and it seemed like our country is more and more divided over politics. And And my thoughts are the church should be that bridge. The cross was Jesus was crucified between two thieves. And so as much as we talk about a culture of separateness for the church, we're present in the world. And so that presence should be a bridge to connect the two sides. But more and more, I see the church choosing a side. And how do you navigate that? How have you navigated that in your current context there? Like, you've got 20 years experience there in your same congregation. So I can imagine you could have some fairly strong conversations in your congregation that other pastors couldn't have.
We have been very intentional. For example, pray for whoever the president is. And so when Trump was elected, of course, there were opinions on both sides, but we said, we're going to pray for this president. And not only that, we took a Wednesday night in our prayer group, and every person who was there, I think there were about a dozen people or so there, a sheet of paper and actually handwritten a note and said, we're praying for you, or whatever they wanted to write. And we sent that to the White House. And many weeks and months passed, and I'd forgotten about it until one day we got a response back from the White House.
Oh, wow.
Saying, we received your letters, and we thank you for that. And it was nice. When Biden was elected, of course, there were opinions on both sides. And we said, you know what? We're going to pray for this new administration. And we did the exact same thing. And so, we do our part. We vote, and we can have opinions, but we will not allow, and we're going to try our hardest to not allow the divisiveness of the political landscape to enter our church. And
That's
so
good.
we are we're going to pray. We are intent on praying for whoever's in office. And from time to time, it doesn't happen often. From time to time, sometimes a voice will get a little bit more vocal, and we just have to remind them, hey, we're going to pray. We're going to pray. And so our church, I believe, does a really good job in seeking to walk the line of not becoming politically divisive. We are called to pray for those who are in authority over us, and that's what we strive to do.
Good. That's great. So, well, I appreciate you being on with us today and answering, a few questions and all, and talking about Sabbath. What are some areas that you're seeing? We talked about, some of the divisiveness, but what are some signs of hope in life that you're seeing, not just in your church, but in culture itself today?
I see a desire for goodness. I think at the core level, people want to see goodness, whether it be, helping rescue an animal or helping a stranded motorist. There is a desire to pursue goodness. And I'm actually seeing more and more of that. As a matter of fact, several years ago, we changed the name of our church to All Things Good. The scriptures have a lot to say about the goodness of God. And really, in my view, the core character of God is his goodness, from which flows his love and mercy and grace. And so, every good thing comes from our Father in heaven. And so this desire to worship our good God and to see his goodness flow is a commonality that binds us together. And then also something else that you referenced earlier in the show, when you talked about, the people you're teaching and mentoring from around the world. I see globalization as a beautiful thing. I see that we can learn from other cultures and celebrate diversity. I'm reading more and more African theologians and Asian theologians and Hispanic theologians, the rise in female theologians, and hearing their perspectives. And so this embrace of diversity and the beauty of diversity, to me, is a good thing and needs to continue.
Yeah, that is, you mentioned the female theologians. Of course, you and I are both Church of the Nazarene, and our denomination from the beginning, while it's been a divisive issue for some, and has been truthfully in certain pockets of the Church of the Nazarene, there are some that push back against the idea of a female pastor, but the woman's voice has been front and center since the founding of our denomination. Mildred Banks Wynkoop was a key figure early on within our church and continues to be celebrated. But one of the things that I mean, I come from my mom is a strong woman. My wife is a strong woman. Her mom was strong. My sister's
Amen.
strong. So I know a lot of strong women. I don't see it as a threat. I celebrate that. And I really
Yes.
celebrate our churches beginning to, or I should say the rise of that female voice within our
Yes.
churches today. I think they bring a level of compassion and empathy, but even beyond that, a perspective that
Yes.
we miss from when we just have one gender, one male, one the male voice is in power there and kind of shaping that conversation. So that is really something I have really enjoyed. Throughout my ministry, I've had a lot of women who have just been called to preach under my ministry, and that's always been a good thing. And sadly, it has been difficult to watch how sometimes they're not. It's not leadership necessarily that rejects them, and rejection may be a strong word, but pushes back against that female in leadership. But a lot of times it's the local congregation that just is not willing to accept a lead pastor as a female.
To their own detriment.
Yeah, agreed. To their own detriment. I mean, I'm telling you, I look across our landscape in the Church of Nazarene, and I don't know I think of Sean Saunders Gaines in Nashville, of course, Carla Sundberg, one of our general superintendents. Before her, we had Nana Gunter was our first general superintendent, was female. And and then we've got, I just lost her name. She's over there in California. Anyway, I see her.
Tara Beth.
Tara Beth Leach. Yeah, there you go. She does an incredible job. I really do enjoy listening to them a lot. And the African voice, the African theologians that are rising. Of course, it's interesting that we're kind of rediscovering them. Augustine was African, and
Yes,
and he's a very prominent voice within the church, in Big C Church. But absolutely, I mean, he has shaped our theology. Even today, he shapes Christian thought. So it's not like it's been absent, but it's a different type of voice. It's the voice that has persevered some racism, persevered some neglect. That shapes you as an individual. Those experiences shape you and give you different perspectives. Because I can say that I've not experienced persecution to that extent before, and don't know what it's like for someone to dislike me just because of my skin color. And so you're gonna read things from a different perspective, just like we read things from a different perspective here in America than they do from overseas, because we are such a blessed nation and really kind of sat in the catbird seat of history, at least for the last 150 years or so. And so that gives you privilege and power that, shapes your ideas too. So yeah, I do. I agree with you. I like that as well. I don't always agree with the perspectives, but I have to remind myself that doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that we disagree. And 9 times out of 10, if I have individual conversations with someone I disagree with, I find a lot more common ground than I do ground with which I disagree. And that's what I have to remind myself constantly.
Amen.
John, it has been such a blessing to have you on today. Is there anything else that I have not asked you that you just burning to let people know out there?
Well, let me say this, going back to sabbatical. Every pastor should think about taking a sabbatical. When you go to your first church, I would love to see a pastor and a church board talk about, hey, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, we're gonna give our pastor a sabbatical. But that conversation needs to happen right at the very beginning. And if a church can put away, even a small church can put away $50 a month, $50 a month for the purpose of, hey, in several years, we're going to use this and give this to our pastor for sabbatical. What a difference that would make. So $50 a month for a year, what, $600?
Yeah.
After 6 years, that's $3,600.
Yeah.
That you can give the pastoral family for sabbatical. And so those conversations should happen at the very beginning. It's something to look forward to. It's something to celebrate. And pastors, be thinking about and planning. Be mindful about your sabbatical. You will be a better pastor, and your church will benefit from it as well.
So that's a great idea. I had never thought about having that conversation Yeah, the very beginning. But that's right. It sets expectations. So often it becomes about, okay, what are you going to do for us? Our church is in decline. How are you going to turn us into the next mega church?
Right.
And so before you have that conversation, you're right. It begins with caring for your pastor.
Yes.
And if your pastor knows that you love him and you care for him or her,
yes.
And it's not just a workhorse, it makes a big difference in the way that pastor is going to approach his ministry there.
Right. Because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
And you're in this for the long haul, and both parties will benefit.
That's great. Well, thanks again, John. Continued blessings on your ministry there. And, to remind the folks out there that are listening, if you would resonate with this episode, if you would like and subscribe and share it with your friends. We're trying to echo other people's voices through eternity, just like the podcast says. It's not about trying to build a following so much as it's about amplifying voices of hope in a world sometimes that likes to amplify the negative things that are going on, amplify evil. We want to lift up the good of the world there, and in so doing, lift up the voice of God. But anyway, thanks again, John, and you have a fantastic day, okay?
Thank you. You too.
You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices, share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles in ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, and writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly.